It's so powerful to understand at a young age.
I do have access to these people who I think have great insights to share.
You are putting a lot of time and energy into these communities.
It's really getting insanely intentional about what you want to accomplish.
Welcome back to I Can Fit That In, the podcast where ambition meets alignment. Today's episode features someone who lives at the intersection of human-centered strategy, innovation, and leadership transformation. Frank Congiu is Executive Vice President of Human Capital Strategy and Executive Partnerships at Randstad Enterprise, where he works with C-suite leaders globally to drive workforce transformation, AI innovation, and employee experience. Over the past 2 decades, Frank has cultivated one of the most connected HR communities in the world, creating deep value networks with CHROs among the Fortune 500. He is also the host of the Radical Innovators podcast. In today's conversation, we will explore Frank's evolution from finance to HR innovation, how he defines leadership in an age of AI and disruption, and why he believes real transformation happens when you bring people together with intention. So let's jump in. Frank, I am so happy to have you here on my show.
Yeah, so good to see you again.
Thank you. So, you and I connected via one of our mutual contacts and friends. And, and David, I'd only met him last year on LinkedIn. And I find it really funny that you and I got to meet in person before I got to meet David in person. But what was so unique about you and I getting to meet and really connect, over a dinner and some drinks afterwards, is that we quickly connected the fact that you and I are both the first in our families to earn a college degree. And it's not often that you see, polished people who are successful in business and have built these lives where, they really are visible, that they enjoy themselves. They kind of put themselves out there on places like LinkedIn, who come from very humble upbringings. And so that was something so unique that you and I connected on. I would love for you to share with my listeners what you'd like them to know about your personal and professional journey to date. And then we're going to dive into some of the things that you're doing now.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And I think maybe I take this for granted, but I have those sorts of experiences all the time. And if you think about that dinner, there's a lot of intentionality in terms of the way we start by starting around some exercise where you talk about one thing that's going well for you and one thing that's maybe not going so well for you. And as a result, I think you take people from strangers and you increase familiarity rapidly. And so those conversations that might not happen so naturally otherwise do tend to happen, whether it's immediately post the dinner or around the table. So I think I experience that often, and it's a story that I'm completely comfortable in telling. So it makes it a bit easier. But, my background is an interesting one, of which I grew up in one of the wealthiest towns in the U.S. in Greenwich, Connecticut, but grew up in a poor and uneducated family. And so I think one of the things that I was always mindful of was that I wasn't going to figure out how to get where I needed to get through my own family. And I started networking at a very early age and being very intentional about talking to my friends' parents about what they'd achieved and how they'd achieved it, and really trying to extract some sort of best practices. And I think by putting yourself out there, all of a sudden you find that people want to help you. And so that led to the right introductions and the encouragement to be the first person in my family to go to college and to stick with it when times got hard as self-funding and working full time. So I think a lot of that background really helped inform and lead to the person I am today.
Yeah, and it's so powerful to understand at a young age that you can talk to other people about their journeys and learn from them, even if you don't have that in your, direct environment, for example, at home. But what I took away from our initial conversation around this is that you really developed this, not just this interest, but this love of mentorship and developing yourself and learning from people. And ultimately, what that led you to is relationship building. I mean, that in and of itself is what relationship building is. It's having interest in other people. It's learning from other people, but it's also vulnerably sharing yourself and authentically sharing yourself. And if you're not doing that, then your relationships can be quite shallow. And I know a lot of us in business and have had, careers on Wall Street and, Fortune 500s, you name it. there's a lot of people who wear a mask every day and who don't necessarily want to share their true selves
Yeah.
with others. And they think that they can't. So it's not that they're intentionally doing it. Maybe some are, but a lot of people just don't feel comfortable being transparent and open. So with what you've built with this incredible HR community and these dinners that you put on where these really true, genuine conversations are happening, what have you noticed that's really helped people show up more authentic and bring their whole self to these environments and these communities that you build?
Yeah. Well, I think it starts, the first thing is that none of this happens if someone doesn't intentionally lead with that. So if you think about that evening, which is a mirror of anything I host, I always go first because how can I ask other people to do something that I haven't yet done? Particularly given the groups tend to be people I know well, and then a mix of strangers, right? You were a stranger that night and now a friend. And so that's the intent behind that, is creating more friends. And you do that by being ultimately role modeling what you want to hear and what to see from others, and really helping give them the permission and the willingness to go there. So I
Mm-hmm.
often think about sometimes after I open up these conversations and I look around, it's like there's a lot of reluctance and there's a lot of hesitancy from anyone wanting to go next. And then there's sometimes that somebody's like, something's really weighing them down, because I think just below the surface, we're all dealing with things and they're relative, right? Some people are dealing with some very significant things. And sometimes in the grander scheme of things, we may not think this is so significant, but to them it is. And so it's almost like that video that was famous years ago on YouTube about the first follower.
Mm.
And so me role modeling it is one thing, but getting the next person to be able to take a risk and share something is really what it takes. And so
Yeah.
what I do is, of course, after that exercise, the whole intent is really, of course, I want to create something in that room, but I want something that lives beyond that. And so my encouragement to every one of those people, because many of these people lead massive organizations and large teams,
Mm-hmm.
and then their teams lead large teams. And so the provocation there is, hey, if you're not doing this with your team, then you're doing them a disservice, because they're likely going through the same things you heard people at this table, but they don't feel like they work in an environment where they could share that. And we talked about this without mentioning the name of a certain Wall Street firm. Two women who came to one of my dinners that worked at that same Wall Street firm. I've never seen cry so much. One couldn't even get their words out before they were going to share. And then you think about, well, in the team that they work in and the organization they work in, there's not a shot that they were ever going to share this with someone that they work with.
Yeah.
So doing that in a professional setting was probably something quite new and I think a bit of a release.
Right. I remember in my last executive role at a Fortune, 140 company, feeling like I was on the brink of my own inner transformation with the work I was doing on myself. And I was healing so much. I was just changing so much of my own emotional state and mental state in ways that I never really knew I could do, but I actually learned that I had more control over that than I had ever been taught. And as I was changing in these really significant ways on the inside, the way it was showing up on the outside was that I was becoming more comfortable sharing who I truly was and talking about stories like being the first in my family to go to college and growing up poor and the illness that my father suffered for, my entire childhood. Whereas those things prior to really taking a hard look at myself and taking responsibility for my emotions and my mindset, those stories were hard to tell. And in fact,
Yeah.
I tried hard not to tell them. And so I love that you are so intentional about these communities you're building by being so intentional about the conversations you have in those rooms. What would you say? You weren't always in this type of a field. You weren't always building communities with CHROs at Fortune 500 companies. This wasn't always your purpose. So what is a pivotal moment or a mindset shift that brought you to this point in your career and in your life where you said, this is what I want to do. I want to build these communities and be more purpose driven?
Yeah. It's going back quite a ways, actually. So I've written a story about this on LinkedIn around how I had a job coming out of college where I was going to be working at Morgan Stanley, and they couldn't start me for 6 weeks, and so I needed income. At the point, I didn't have enough money to be able to pay my rent, so I thought to myself, I need something,
Yeah.
and I found a job on Craigslist, and the job description was quite ambiguous, and I just thought to myself, I'll go check this out. Went through a fairly clearly wasn't a rigid interview process because they offered me the job and said, "Can you start tomorrow?" And it was doing just like very administrative tasks. Fast forward all of 3 days, and they said, "Can you drive their CEO to a keynote on Saturday morning?" Now, when I went through the interview process, they were giving me this. They gave me a bright orange book, and at the time, I just kind of threw it in the back of my car, and I didn't think of it. I didn't look at it. I didn't read it, and I definitely didn't do my homework. So that's something that I would encourage, thinking of differently. But the pivotal moment was that morning, that Saturday morning, that I thought I was just taking a CEO to a keynote on Saturday to make some extra money. Went from talking to an incredibly impressive person to seeing a keynote on stage where there were stories that were shared that resembled my childhood in terms of embarrassment of being driven to school in a certain car, um, an inability to afford certain presents or things like that on Christmas.
Right.
And on that car ride back, we shared and we talked about all these things. And it's to the point where, and this is a guy named Keith Ferrazzi, where at the end of the car ride, he said to me, "You seem like a smart guy. Why don't you work for me? And if you like the job, you quit the job at Morgan Stanley." And that is where things massively changed. So I thought I was going to be a finance person. I ended up taking my background in psychology and accounting, the two things I were studying at the time, and putting those into something that really helped me make me really relevant across a lot of functions. Because at the time I was working with heads of sales, heads of marketing, CEOs, presidents, right? HR wasn't even something I touched. It was sort of like a group that you met with when you were going to deliver projects, but they weren't a stakeholder. So I think that's probably the most pivotal moment for me.
Yeah. And it's so funny to me that, I mean, you know, your dad or your mom pulling up in a hoopty to pick you up from school. I mean, I know that feeling so much, the embarrassment and the dread every day. It's such a unique thing that you could connect with Keith on what he shared on stage that really resonated so deeply in your heart and in your soul. It's a keynote isn't just about, what does this person have to teach me? It's about how does this person actually inspire me and emotionally resonate with me? So clearly he was put in your life for a reason, and it was a huge part of your path.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things that ignites possibility where you look at someone that is so polished and doing so well, and then you hear this story and you're like, wait a second, maybe I can do this. And
Yeah.
this sort of possibility you probably didn't see or think of at the time.
Yeah. I mean, that's what inspiration is, right? That's how you inspire others. It's by being truthful and being honest and shining your light, not trying to make yourself someone that you're not. And that's not inspiring. So I want to dive into, with these dinners that you host, you travel a lot, you are putting a lot of time and energy into these communities that you have built and are building and will continue to. So how do you keep yourself from getting too drained? Because I imagine, it's a lot of giving. It's a lot of outpouring of energy. So how do you keep yourself from being too drained?
Gosh, this year has been tough because tomorrow night I'll be hosting my 31st dinner in this point of the year, and it looks like I'll eclipse 50 this year.
Wow.
And when you think about that in terms of how many weekdays there are, it's a significant commitment and a lot more time than I would have thought I would have invested. And this has gone from what started as a side passion in my first job when I moved into HR, and I used this more as an ability to get connected into the HR world, versus now it being really my full-time role. So I think what I've done is a few things. Number one is being pretty intentional about what I do when I am home. So spending as much time with my children, making sure that I do exercise and eat healthy. Right. So those are like
Yeah.
three things, because when you're on the road, it's easy to unfortunately not sleep well, not eat well, and you're certainly not. Maybe I get to FaceTime my kids. That's it.
Yeah.
So it's really making sure that like when I am home, I am present and doing all of the right things. And then the other piece has just been around being really strategic. So while 50, oh, 50, not 50 yet, but while 31 dinners across the span of 7 months is a lot, I've been much more intentional this year about connecting those. So if I go to San Francisco, then I'm going to Seattle the next night. So I'm not flying across country for a single trip like I used to do, or do crazy things like fly out in the morning and take a red eye home just to host a dinner. Like those, I'm saying no to those sorts of things that I used to do when I was younger. I think so. There's a sort of this ability to now have more courage to say like, this isn't good for me. And if it's not good for me, it's not good for the company I work for long term if I'm not showing up at my best.
Right, absolutely. And what are they, what are your, I mean, your non-negotiables sound like they are nutrition and exercise and obviously, time with your family. What would you say keeps you grounded and energized just like on a daily basis, outside of your movement and your food? How do
Mm.
you stay so grounded and so focused?
I think it depends on like what you get joy from. So, generosity is often, I think, a selfish act, right? When I do things like make introductions to two people that I think they would find very beneficial, I love doing that. The role that I have right now is interesting in that I don't actually have a sales responsibility for the organization. Instead, I work very closely with people that do and try to help them become more successful. And so when I think I find a lot of joy in helping these individuals in their career, and then with their gratitude, those things sort of lift me up as well. And so I think one of these things that I've tried to get better at is daily gratitude, because there are days where I'm like, I look around and should be quite grateful for everything I have, but sometimes I'm like, I'm not as happy as I can or should be. And it's a matter of zeroing in on that one thing that maybe isn't going well versus stepping back and saying like, tomorrow I'll forget about this. And so I've tried to be a lot more intentional about realizing that as bad as things might seem, they could never quite are as bad or just as likely as good as things might seem. They're not always that great. And so being intentional about trying to step back and just remember that versus like letting that bad email that used to ruin my whole day now just be a little bit more indifferent about it.
Such a good point because some days the energy around you is just going to be off. And it might not even have anything to do with you directly, but it's just not your day, right? And you can't
Yeah.
try to control that and force it. Sometimes you just have to say, you know what, tomorrow's a new day. And that's okay. I don't have to get caught up and lost in this and let it ruin everything. I can just keep
Yeah.
going.
Sometimes it's
Those
not
are the
even
nights
tomorrow.
go to bed early, right?
That's right. That's right. I mean, and sometimes it's just like, I think I early in my career, there was no ability to do this. I would hold on to things for weeks. Now I can let things go in minutes. So maybe there's a product of a couple more years of experience under the belt, and the other is just an intentional mindset shift.
Yes, I love that. The intentional mindset shift. And that's what so many people could benefit from that. Just actually taking a look at what's playing out. What thoughts are you having around that bad email you just got from a client or a prospect, right? And what are those thoughts that you're having and how can you reframe them or just let them go and keep moving forward? Because getting lost in it does nothing but bring you down that emotional tube and you
Yeah.
get lost in the drain. So
Well, I had a previous leader who used to say something to me. He'd say, "There's nothing that you can break that we can't fix together." And
mm,
so I try to take that and say that to members of my team now, so that there's this feeling that if you make a mistake, it's not really going to be that big of a deal. And just imparting that on people, it helps you almost reinforce it for yourself as well.
yeah, such a good point. It's so funny. I remember on Wall Street being taught so many years ago in my early 20s, don't ever put anything in an email that you don't want on the front page of the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, yeah,
And I remember that just stuck with me forever. I'm like, okay, no problem. That means essentially what it means is don't treat anyone poorly in writing ever. Of course, we shouldn't do that at all, but that's
yeah. I
really
was
what
going to
they were
say that.
teaching.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a lot about leadership. I am curious how you see behavioral shifts or mindset shifts coming into the ways that people lead in the future. So let's just kind of talk about the next 5 years. There's so much advancement with AI. There are so many things changing constantly in our world, our environments. What do you see shifting when it comes to leadership?
I think the biggest strength is going to be resilience,
Mm,
like that people need to figure out how to either hone in on or dial up,
yeah.
because you need to be incredibly personal resilient no matter what. Just because if you think about, and this is a time in where we're dealing with a number of things that you could let impact you, whether it's geopolitical things,
Mhm.
stuff professionally, or these different trends around AI that are massively impacting everyone.
Yeah.
With CEOs who used to be very cautious about that, now it's almost become like a thing that they're confidently bragging about in terms of headcount reductions while bottom line is improving. So I think it's going to be about resilience in terms of like how do you make your teams resilient, because there's going to be a massive change in terms of there's some data that came out just yesterday around, I think it was 25% of entry level jobs year over year have gone away, and executive roles have gone up 4%. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so people who have young children, or if you are someone coming out of college, like there's going to be, so everybody is going to be impacted by this, right? And so um, while those like I think that I'm quite confident that there are going to be new jobs created. I don't think AI is going to just wipe out all jobs.
Yeah.
This is a big period of transformation. So I think, being able to stay resilient through that is going to be key.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I feel like resilience is something that people are interested in, and yet a lot of people don't really understand how to cultivate resilience. And it's also not something that's easy to teach, right? Like, people have to move through experiences and
Yeah.
understand how to respond to them.
100%. Right. So like sometimes if one of my superpowers, I'd say, is resilience,
Yeah.
but I attributed that to when I was at NYU. One of my first my jobs when I was there was going business to business, trying to sell people AT&T phone service and then Quill office supplies. And so if you can imagine the reaction you get from lawyers and doctors in New York, and the amount of times you get told to go F yourself and get a real job, and you're told you're a loser, and then you got to remember to smile and go to the next door because you never know where that next sale is. I think it was experiences like that that made me incredibly resilient, where somebody says no, it's like, I really don't care.
Mm-hmm.
But you do have to go through those things. You have to experience those no's to get to the point where you can be indifferent about it, and put a smile on, and keep knocking on those proverbial next doors.
Absolutely. And I would say another thing about resilience too is to not make everything in your life a catastrophe when it's not going
Right.
your way. And I see that in numerous executives that I've worked with over the years. And I saw this in myself for a long time too, before I really started to do the inner work. I had this level of resilience that I thought was very strong. And then all of a sudden, so many things in my life just feel like they're too much.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, I was just really misaligned and, no longer really attached to my own values. And that's what led me to catastrophize everything that was going wrong. So of course, it's like seeing a certain color car or a certain type of car.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you see it everywhere. Same thing happens when you make everything a catastrophe. When the slightest thing goes wrong or doesn't go your way, you get used to that. And so you start, you fall into bad habits of the way that you react, and you become very reactionary instead of responsive. So I feel like with resilience, so much of it is about choosing a response, not just urgently reacting to everything in your life. Right.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So you have a podcast, Radical Innovations. Can you tell my listeners about your podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. So the podcast was born out of I really sometimes have to step back and understand myself, like, this isn't normal. This is a cool thing that I get to go out and meet all these global executives. And so I got a ton of inbound outreach on LinkedIn for people saying, like, what happens in those rooms? And I try to write up a summary, but of course, like, they have to be a bit vague. I can't necessarily share the specific insights, and I certainly can't attribute those to individuals. And so I get a lot of people reaching out and asking, like, hey, what happened in that dinner? I'd love to be invited to one. And the other thing too is, like, there's only so many seats. You really can't invite everybody to these. So that's where the idea was born. I thought to myself, I do have access to these people who I think have great insights to share. They tend to do it at the conferences of which I attend. And so, like, again, a lot of these people aren't going to those events. So what's a great way to be able to take these and broadcast these insights? And so that stemmed from something I launched 2 years ago called Radical Innovators Collaborative, which is something that was born out of a partnership with the TED organization, where we were bringing together CHROs, CIOs, and then unicorn tech founders from some leading companies like Anthropic and others around disruptive technologies. So this combination of, like, what are these organizations doing that can push the thinking of these, what can be large and stodgy organizations that are not quick to move, and say, hey, these things are coming down the pipe. You need to think about this. And what was great about that was we weren't having these fluffy panels. We were talking about this in real time, and then coming up with working groups and having these large organizations like Walmart and Qualcomm and CVS say, we're going to pick this project and we're going to pilot this, and we'll talk about the best practices learned and the struggles as well when we meet in the next session.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of these things were happening at the same time. I was doing the dinners, I was doing the Radical Innovators group, and I just thought, like, let me just for synergies launch this podcast under the Radical Innovators banner. So It's been phenomenal. Actually, in a little bit, I have the CHRO Pfizer, so I go from you to that, and it's been an amazing blessing to just get these incredibly high powered executives on.
Yes, it's so cool. And where can people find you and your podcast?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So on Spotify, YouTube, and I guess wherever else they can be found, but those are probably the two main channels these days.
Yeah. And then Frank is extremely active on LinkedIn. So we will include links for where to find him on LinkedIn and the show notes. Now, Frank, I'd love for you to leave my listeners with your one truth that you want them to know about time, energy, or intention.
Yeah. I'm big on intention. So this can come from any author, but if you think about Simon Sinek's Start with Why, and then the book that I mentioned before, Never Eat Alone, and Keith Ferrazzi, it's really getting insanely intentional about what you want to accomplish and being able to share that in a really succinct way. And I talk about this all the time because I meet people who are reaching out to me about, hey, I need to find my next role, or and they start to explain. And I say, this could have been way more impactful if you had thought through like what are the things you want to do, and then what are some of the who are some of the companies you'd want to work for, and who do you even know, and I give them a little bit of a playbook. And so it's that intentionality that always sticks out to me. If you think about that, I could set up today and I could work an insanely busy day, or I could wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be intentional about there's two things that if I get done, I'll be content with walking away from my desk, going to work out, spending time with my kids, and not saying I work 12 hours because I don't think anybody cares, right? It's about what you get done. And
Yeah.
so I think intention, it all starts with being intentional.
Yeah, that was beautiful. And what an ending to this episode, because you essentially just described to us that you fit in what matters in your life intentionally. And that is something that more people can learn from and start to do for themselves every day, because that is what equals a fulfilling life. No matter what version of success we each create, if we fit in what matters to us and not just have some badge of honor of I worked 14 hours, look at me. It's no, I fit in making a healthy meal for my family. I fit in some time with my kids this morning. I fit in a workout for myself. I fit in breathing some fresh air and putting my feet on the grass because I like those things. And that's what
Right.
life is about, right? It is not about what are we producing and what is our output on a daily basis. It's about how are we living in a way that feels really good to each of us, not just looks good on paper. So Frank, thank you for being here. This was obviously a blast, like I knew it would be.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, and I'm looking forward to either the next time I'm in Chicago and get to have you at dinner, or next time you're out in Connecticut. I've
Oh,
I've just missed you with
absolutely.
your recent trip, unfortunately.
I know, but we will definitely see each other soon. Can't wait to see you in Chicago for sure next time. So everyone, we will include, like I said, in the show notes where to find Frank. Thank you for being here with us today. And please like, share, subscribe so we can get these messages to more people who need them. And be sure to grab your copy of my book by hopping over to aaroncoop.com or search for Aaron Coop on retail sites where books are sold.